Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and today I am running about 100-degree fever, but the show must go on because there was an FAQ today. What happened? A whole bunch of things happened. I'm only going to go through the matched play changes. The four main ones are Onslaught, which is now a triple. It used to be a double. Rampage, which is now called Reckoning, and it only works if half your warband is dead. You have to end within an inch of an enemy as well, so ranged rampages are gone. It's not that the move has to be within an inch of an enemy, sorry. You have to end your move within an inch to get the attack action, which is pretty different for ranged fighters. Divine Blessings have changed. These are all pretty sensible changes. Ferocity and Brutality are 30 points and 40 points now, and Fortitude is 20 points now. Fortitude is the plus 4 wounds one. Ferocity is the plus 1 attack one, and Brutality is the plus 1 damage one. I think in general it's a shame that Brutality has always had to be the same price as Ferocity, given that it's just so much less impactful. But with Onslaught down, Ferocity is less good because the types of fighters that were always sort of very good with Ferocity plus 1 attack were also the types of fighters that were also very good with Onslaught. So Onslaught becoming a triple is sort of a nerf to Ferocity. So it kind of makes sense that they would go to the same points cost. Last is Respite, is now a double. This is an ability that you probably don't know about because nobody played it because it was unplayable before as a triple, but you just heal equal to the value of the dice value. It's a universal ability. It's a double now, which makes it obviously much better because a triple costs the same resources as two doubles in terms of wild dice, so it literally got twice as cheap, which is great. Let's talk about the winners and losers of this update. The biggest winner in my mind is Death Swarms. I've got a picture of Soulblight zombies here, but I think that it's not just Soulblight that won. Basically, what we're looking at is lethality is way down. So any amount of fighting, right? Onslaught is harder to do. Rampaging, which lets you kind of burn through a whole bunch of fighters at once, that's way harder to do. Obviously, having just hitty fighters in general costs more points. So lethality has gone way down, which is great for swarms in general, not just death ones. But what you have to remember is that gun lines didn't get a lethality reduction. One main thing with Divine Blessings is that the Might Blessing is still usable for ranged fighters. So things like the Slant Star Master are still going to be able to do their thing. Things like the new Duarden guys are still going to be able to do their thing. Any kind of shooter can still do its thing here, which means that the death battle trait becomes more important than ever because lethality as a whole, the balance has tipped towards gun lines, and death swarms are a natural counter to gun lines. So Soulblight and Royal Beast Flayers are very, very happy with this change. Flesh Eater Courts and OCR Bone Reapers are also happy with the change, but they're not quite as good at taking advantage of it as Soulblight and Royal Beast Flayers are. But basically, these two factions are both very good at exploiting your opponent's inability to clear bodies. So in order to deal with like a big swarm of Royal Beast Flayers, the opponent really needs to be able to kill 2 or 3 things a turn. Now, most warbands, their ability to do so has been significantly hampered, whether that's through attacking or through shooting. And you have to also remember that swarms weren't really onslaughting or rampaging anyway. Gorath had his own double that he was using for his attacks in Soulblight, and Royal Beast Flayers was either using the new Tyrannic cohort. He's not new, but his recent buff in points was new, or they were using Wielder of the Blade. Wielder of the Blade's ferocity buff did just go up 5 points, but he wasn't using Onslaught. wielder of the blade was using his own bonus move action, so he didn't really care about onslaught. So you really only lost 5 points there, which is not a big deal. So the two swarmy death warbands really didn't require very much onslaughting in order to get their damage in. And the lack of onslaught, the lack of rampage for their opponents makes it much harder for them to clear these guys off the board. That's pretty impactful. And so I would say the biggest winner of this change is Soulblight and Royal Beast Flayers. I would say they're equally winners here. The number 2 winner here, I would say, is bonus action doubles for elites. Basically, Onslaught and Rampage have always been major force multipliers for big elite fighters. For the sort of entire history of the game, the mechanics have said you should either be exploiting the force multipliers of the game, Onslaught and Rampage being the biggest ones, or you should be exploiting the action economy of the game, Swarm warbands being the ones to do that, right? Well, 2 of the 3 ways to really exploit the force multipliers of the game have just been majorly nerfed, which means that the last bastion of this, bonus action doubles, is really the only way to play the old way. So that means things like a Varangard. So the Varangard has a double that gives it potentially plus 3 attacks, which is the same number of attacks it normally has. So it's basically a bonus attack action that just has to be paired to a real attack action. Achillean King also has essentially the same thing. Achillean King has kind of fallen out of vogue, but with the change to how counter works and the change to Onslaught and Rampage, I could see it getting played a little bit more. I still think that the Slan Star Master probably just takes the Achillean King's lunch in the same Grand Alliance. But what I do like about the Achillean King is the Star Master did get a tiny bit worse with the change to Rampage. The charge double, though, is the really big one here. So Mega Boss, Clawback, this has been a classic thing in Destruction for a long time. The Slangor with +1 strength, the ability to go move, double to move even further and then still get an attack in, or a double to then get 2 attacks in on a much closer foe is a really big deal. And it's always been good in the game, but the fact that other similar things that are playing in the same space are no longer as good makes it so that I think these fighters just stand further above the crowd. The fact also that, Rampage isn't around, and it just means that knowing that you have a low investment plan that doesn't take a lot of wild dice, that you can use every round, that's a really big deal now. So, another set of bonus actions is what Skaven can do with Rat Ogres. Rat Ogres, I think, took a bit of a hit in the last FAQ, of course, because Packmasters aren't resurrectable anymore. But this is a bit of a buff to Rat Ogres, so you might see them coming back a little bit. Not that they ever became terrible, but they became clearly an inferior way to play Skaven. And now I think that there's some real argument to be said that they might have more relative value, just because so many of the things in the meta that do what they do don't do it as well anymore. There's all sorts of examples, though, of fighters that have bonus action doubles. Even things like Might Makes Right, I think, and Blood for the Blood God, I think those have gotten, those have always been a little bit worse, knowing that you have to kind of get something to confirm them, but I think that they have risen a little bit in my estimation. So, something like a Korgorath or an Annihilator Prime, those were using Onslaught a lot, and those were big-time Rampagers, but they're not, devastated about this because they at least have some way to force multiply on a double, right? So a Korgorath, maybe before it would have been really happy about having Onslaught to win 1v1 battles, but it's still just as good a chaff clearer as it ever was. And so that's something to be happy about if you're, in, say, Khorne or Stormcast or Ogres. Another little winner is fighters who have good quads. So I have an Annihilator painting here because Force of a Falling Star is essentially, it's a lot like Rampage, but it's not as good. But now you don't mind so much. So Force of a Falling Star just says you take a bonus move action, and then if you're within an inch, then your opponent's fighter takes double the dice value. So if you're on 4s, 5s, or 6s, it's very good because you take 8 damage, you take 10 damage, you take 12 damage. So those are all solid amounts that you're happy with. And so this especially helps shield annihilators, which I think had kind of fallen a little bit compared to the Grand Hammers. Especially the Shield Annihilator Prime had fallen in my estimation compared to the Grand Hammer. But now, Force of a Falling Star requires you to get within 1 inch range, so that extra 2 inch range of the Grand Hammer becomes a little less valuable, and Shield Annihilators just have a lot going for them right now as a counter to Strength 6 in general, and also just now having this quad that is better on them than it is on their sort of hittier brothers. Sneaky Stab made Squig Riders just get pretty interesting. Again, with no Rampage going around, you can kind of build around quads now because you couldn't build around a quad before because, one, they only come around 37% of the time, but then even when they do, you're better off just having a big guy because the way to build around quads is just to have any big guy, and then on the turns when you have a quad, your big guy rampages. Well, now that you can't do that, something that really does rampage on a quad, which is a Squig Rider, and they get kind of the old rampage, so a Squig Rider can now move 8 inches and hit something, which is, just as impactful as it ever was. But now that you don't have other opportunities to get just as much value, you're in a good spot. So I can't remember if Mollog gets Sneaky Stab, actually. I thought he did, but he might not. But either way, if he does, he's amazing with it, right? Mollog is another one where he costs 10 more points now because you were always blessing him, but he had lots of things that he liked to do other than just Onslaught, so he's happy with it. Just in general, high impact triples are very good. So Mollog was tripling all over the place, right? But I also wonder, if it's time to fall into the Calthea trap. Anyone who saw my meta video from last week saw that, Calthea still just hovers slightly underneath the 50% win rate, just because it's so easy to think that you've got some really high impact Calthea stuff to do, and then your opponent is just getting more value out of just rampaging on a big thing than you were off of declining your rampage to have a big Calthea triple, right? So, now there's some question there of whether it's actually kind of worth it now for something like Calthea. So there's a lot of high impact triples and weird good quads that are out there that have become little winners in this change. The last little winner that I'm going to talk about is these ability specialists, and I've always loved my Untamed Beasts beast speaker. I wonder if I can reach her. No, I'd have to go around the desk to reach her right now. But it's a great model, and models like this that have a cool little ability, but they're just very fragile. They're a little bit winners now because it's going to be more often that they can do their thing. Because before you could do your thing, but it wasn't really creating any more value than it was before, and there was a lot of stuff that could just kill your fighters. So, for example, why would I have a beast speaker and a cat when I could just have another plains runner and then a fighter that costs as much as a cat plus 60 points, right? The difference between the plains runner and the beast speaker. And then that fighter just using an onslaught was often going to get as much value as my cat plus my beast speaker. Well, now there's less chance of your beast speaker dying right away because lethality is down, and it's harder to get value from just random big guy number 4, right? So the beast speaker rises a little bit. I still think it's going to struggle a little bit because with all these ability specialists running around, you probably want to have one of the last vestiges of sort of pouncing power is what I would call it. So power projection is what what real wargamers call it. So like a Slan Star Master or a Varangard or a Clawback or something that can reach out and smack something. If you're not going to be swarming the board, I think you really want one of those in your list if you want to win a lot. And so there's a lot of factions that have something like that, but I think those might be running around a little more. But if they're not running around, then I think you can get a little bit of value out of these ability specialists now that you used to not be able to get value out of. Now we're going to get into the losers, and the first loser I would say is like generic Chaos soup. The Chaos Grand Alliance in general. Vexmore basically died today. I don't think you can really run Vexmore easily. It's not that you can't run it at all, but when you're only rolling 2 dice with Vexmore, it's a tough place to be. And so I think that I just wouldn't play Vexmore in a competitive list now, knowing the ways I can use my dice. Now, Vexmore was never a very good Rampager, but just Onslaught was so key to everything it was doing. Instead, you basically have Deathbringer filling the same role, which I think is a real loss to Chaos, partly because Vexmore is like more flexible than Deathbringer, but also partly because Deathbringer is a lot less fun. I've seen it on the board a few times now, and I've heard more reports of it on the board, and the all or nothing aspect of Deathbringer, it basically creates a lot of feel-bads. It's not unbalanced in the game. I think it's a solid piece. It's not broken, but the games it leads to are just not particularly enjoyable. The ones that I've played, or the ones that I've seen. So I think that that's too bad, and I think just generally in Chaos, it's a disimprovement, whatever it is. I've got sick brain today, but you know what I mean. Then there's a lot of other Chaos pieces that really needed Onslaught and Rampage to function. The biggest one of these, in my opinion, was the Fomeroid Crusher. Fomo Crusher was sort of a standby of early Warcry and took a massive nerf. So it was one of the best ways to kind of build around Rampage for a long time was just you could get a +1 attack blessing on your Fomeroid Crusher and you could go to town. And even before the +1 attack blessing, people were still happily, especially when he was a little bit cheaper, when he was 260 points, people were happily paying 260 points for him. And just like, if you get to Rampage, it's pretty crazy with him because you go straight into a crowd, you just smash everything with your strength 6, and then you've got toughness 6 and a bunch of wounds for when they start hitting back at you. Now that's a lot riskier. Your ability to kind of get him going is going to be a lot less. He also costs 10 more points because his buff is a lot more expensive, 10 points more expensive. So he's essentially been nerfed 20 points compared to before. So that's just a tough spot for him to be in, and he's not going to be rampaging anybody. So yeah, very sad day for the Fomeroid Crusher. I've gotten plenty of fun games out of Fomo Crusher, though, and I've made a lot of people hate him. So I deserve it, and it's fine. We'll survive here. But I think Chaos in general is pretty sad. So I think if you were running a Fomeroid Crusher, you probably just switch to your Ogroid Myrmidon. It's only 5 points more, and it at least has a high impact, medium impact triple. But just having a triple is a little bit better. So the fact that it has an ability that you're happy to use is an important thing to have. But just in general, most Chaos factions have pretty butt abilities. So just they were using Onslaught and Rampage a lot, and that's a tough situation. And kind of piggybacking onto that, I think an even better poster child of factions that had butt abilities is Askergan Trueblades. Now, Askergan Trueblades were built on the assumption of Onslaught as part of their profile. So something like the Askergan Pariah, or I don't know why I didn't put the Charnel Mace, which is even more like this. It costs 115 points, strength 6, and 3/4 damage, right? These fighters were built with the assumption that you would be onslaughting a lot. in your warband, right? If you're not onslaughting, the Askerigan Pariah is just not doing anything most of the time, right? It has a situational double that it can use to, put the bird on someone, or that's from the Corvus Cabal ability, but it has the same put the bird on somebody ability that a few other factions that have birds have. Lumineth has this bird ability too. And so the Pariah has got this situational ability, but it's mostly just using onslaught if it needs to fight. And that's just a really tough place to be if you're hoping to kind of do anything in this new meta, in this new matched play situation. So hopefully one day Askerigan Trueblades get like 20 points cheaper on every single fighter, because that's really what they were relying on. But for now, I would say they're in a really tough spot. Any kind of faction without a high impact quad or triple is in an equally tough space. And that's also Askerigan Trueblades. So, even though they're sort of built to always be onslaughting, they also just, their 2 triples are not good and their quad is not good, right? So allying becomes really necessary if you've got one of these factions that just doesn't have a high impact quad. And that is like a third of the factions in the game. Askerigan is, of course, the worst offender, but there's a bunch of factions that are kind of in this boat and would really need help with this change. I think that this is a change that's going to be really great for letting factions with sort of medium impact doubles really shine. And maybe I should have put that in the winners section. Like, I'm thinking about how Scions of the Flame have a double that is only better than Onslaught in like a few situations. But now you could actually use that double and be happy with it and feel that you get a lot more flavor out of your Scions of the Flame. I actually am probably going to go put Scions of the Flame onto the table as soon as I'm well enough to be hanging out with people indoors. But the flip side of that is, of course, something like Askerigan Trueblades. I didn't want to put respite on the winners or the losers, because I think anyone right now who tells you what the effect of respite is going to be on the metagame is kind of just joshing you or pretending that they know something that they don't know, because, here's why. So, like, for the most part, if someone who's used a lot of rampages tells me what they're going to feel when they don't have rampage anymore, I believe them, because they've used rampage and they've probably also had plenty of games where they didn't get any rampages, right? And they know the difference between those two games. And so they know what losing rampage is going to mean for them. Any change where you've kind of seen it in action and stuff like that, it's much easier to figure out what the downstreams are. But respite, nobody's used respite. It was completely unplayable before. So if it saw 0 use before, how are we going to use it now? That's, I think, a pretty open question. So we can theory craft a lot, and I'm about to, but it's a lot of mystery, and it's going to be interesting to explore. Basically, you're probably only using it if you're going to gain 5 to 6 life, but as long as you're not in combat, you can do that. So 5 to 6 life was completely unplayable at triple, right? If you have a triple that's going to deal 5 or 6 damage, even that's like a little disappointing. It's something you do, but you're not into it. Healing is almost as good as dealing damage, though. And so because it's only almost as good, you just weren't doing it. But on a double, we were happily doing doubles that were going to deal 3 damage before. So gaining 5 to 6, like, I would happily use a double that was going to gain me 4. And now that we're going to gain 5 or 6, that I wouldn't happily gain 4, but I would be willing to use a double that was only going to gain me 4. So now that we're gaining 5 or 6, that's crazy. That's really intense. That's a lot of healing. So thinking about how we use this, one is you've got like a mid-rangey type of fighter, say a Chaos Warrior that just got buffed actually. You can disengage, respite, and then walk back onto the objective. and just be presenting like a wall of health that your opponent can't deal with. Or it's like they come, they hit you, they try to hit you again, you do the Slaves to Darkness heal, the heal 3, then on your turn you disengage and then you heal 5 or 6, and now they've wasted all this effort and you are all over the way, like you've healed 9 life total. That's so rough if they're trying to kill your Chaos Warrior. Now, Chaos Warrior might not be a great example because you're not really covering a ton of board with a Chaos Warrior because they're a little bit expensive. So like on an objective, you're not that scary. But let's say something more like a Gut Ripper. The Gut Ripper doesn't have the reaction to heal, but at 75 points, Gut Rippers do cover objectives, and 15 health, they present like a real wall of bodies. I wonder about a Cruel Boys list. This isn't how I play Cruel Boys, but a Cruel Boys list with like 8 Gut Rippers, I kind of wonder about how effective that could be now, if you can get the activation advantage onto someone and then just gain 1,000,000 life with doubles, and so just present these unkillable Gut Rippers. I think that could be a pretty interesting set of sort of ways to play. Another thing is sort of fighters that need to get kills but can get bloodied pretty badly during it. So for example, if you are in a battle and you kill your opponent, you might want to respite so that the next thing that comes onto you doesn't finish you off. So I think about any 1v1 battle, but also something like the Lord of Hubris, who goes in, kills a chaff for a pretty cheap price, and then generally just gets killed. Well, the Lord of Hubris could come in, kill a chaff, and then the next round heal right up to maybe be able to kill another chaff in round 4 instead of just dying. So, your hubris might be able to last the whole battle now and get a little bit more value just by maybe slowing down his pace a little bit, just so that he can get the respite in before he goes all out again, right? So there might be a lot of little uses for that in a lot of games that might be pretty effective. Or it might just turn out that actually it's not as good to slow down your pace with your hubris guy, and it's better to just YOLO him and get him killed. So I think it's going to be really interesting at seeing people kind of figure out when to use respite and when not to. But it's definitely going to change things, because healing 5 or 6 life on a double is a really good rate of return on investment. The last loser is overall balance. And this is not to only complain. I've talked about a lot of winners here, but I would say these match play changes are good structural changes that require a complete points rewire, redesign in order to make them fully work. And we didn't get any points changes here, which I think is too bad. So if we check on the effects, the worst Grand Alliance got significantly worse, right? Chaos doesn't have the tools to deal with. Some Chaos factions do, but most Chaos factions don't have the tools to deal with the Onslaught and the Rampage change. Meanwhile, Death Swarms were already 2 of the 4 best factions in the game. Soulblight is incredible right now. Royal Beast Flayers is incredible right now. Both of them are very, very happy about these changes. And then, of course, there's wild swings in terms of which elites are improved and hamstrung. Now, in general, right, I said ability specialists are a huge part of the flavor of Warcry, about what makes Warcry cool, and they were basically invalidated by Rampage, and they were also pretty hurt by Onslaught as well. And so seeing those ability specialists eventually work their way into the game is going to be a good thing, but right now, the current points algorithm of the game is built around Onslaught and Rampage being very important, and it's going to drastically imbalance the game until we fix it. So seeing these Death Swarms kind of take over is pretty terrifying, and I think should worry anybody who goes to events with a high degree of people trying to win, right? You can do a really casual, fluffy event where nobody's bringing swarms, and I think you can mostly muddle your way through the sort of points imbalances that were created. But it's just a thing to note if you're in a situation where people are trying to win the game. And so to that end, I think TOing got a lot more difficult. Now, for people who are willing to put in the work, TOing might have just gotten very rewarding, because if you can convince your players to kind of ignore certain things via your mission design or your kind of extra bits and bobs on the side, right? Like I like to make little side quests in my tournaments, things like that. Then I think that you can create a lot of fun here, right? If you can steer people towards some of the cool little ability weirdos that make Warcry so great, then I think you're in a really good situation. But if you are TOing something that has sort of an expectation that winning matters and that going 4-0 matters, which is a really valid part of the game, and I defend the right of people to want those types of tournaments. But if you are TOing that type of event, then it's going to be really difficult to make a balanced, interesting pack, because you can make missions that are tough for swarms, but a tournament that only has those types of missions is kind of equally exploitable. And honestly, objective missions are some of the most fun missions in the game. I wouldn't want to be missing those missions. I wouldn't want to be unable to play those missions. And also, a lot of TOs don't like feeling like they're putting their thumb on the scale. A lot of TOs want to be able to just play balanced, like not necessarily balanced in the current meta, but like missions that have interesting play to them, right? Missions that have a lot of different ideas to them. And they don't want to have to think about how, if I have a mission that scores on objectives, such and such army is going to have a like free win here. And I need to like think about that. A lot of TOs don't like to have to think about that. So I do think it got a lot more difficult because of the balance situation, and I think that's too bad. I really wish this had come with a points update. I expect that we will get one eventually, a points update that kind of looks at how these changes have affected different factions. But right now it's tough, right? Because you would want to see, the price of a zombie or a skeleton or a what are the special Royal Beast Flayer ghouls called? I can't remember what they're called. I have a bunch of them too. I don't know why I don't remember their name. But the ghouls, the ghouls that aren't the Feck ghouls, because I think Feck ghouls are reasonably priced at 60 points. But the way those fighters have gotten a lot better and so kind of need to come up in points versus the way, say, an Astragan Pariah probably needs to come down 20 points, right? 20 might be too much, right? But like 15 points. We kind of need that in order to be the other half of this update. And so that's just kind of tough. I think right now, if I manage to TO an event between now and whatever the next Warcry update is, I would really be looking to target something that's like explicitly casual only, which is pretty cool, but also a little bit too bad, because there should be able to be events of every flavor. And I really like I like when people are able to be proud that they went 4-0 at an event, even when it's a more chill event, right? And so these balance changes, like if a buddy of mine won with like a faction that was a huge winner out of these changes, I'd have a tough time feeling like as proud of him as I would be if he had won 6 months ago with a similar type of list, right? Just because of, the way the last couple FAQs have been very like, we're trying to change the underlying structure of the game, but we're not necessarily changing it. We're not taking into account all of the downstream impacts as we do it. And so we're getting this like slow grind into whatever, the future state of the game is. And it's just producing a lot of current games that are not as fun as they should be, and I think it's too bad. I think that was kind of what I was getting at in my last meta video about how the competitive meta is not as rewarding as it should be or interesting as it should be, and I think that this will exacerbate that for a little while until we can get kind of the points fixes that we need to come alongside this. So I think that that's too bad, but I do think it's worth kind of focusing on some of the cool, like, I think that structurally some of these changes will eventually get us to a good place. I think that just the game was too killy. These poor little ability specialists that create the flavor of the game weren't able to thrive pretty much at all in very few factions. And so work that we can do to make those fighters more of the game is a positive thing. But I really think we only got about a third of the way there today. And I think that that's kind of a shame. And I hope that we can kind of finish what we started at a future date and have that future date be as soon as possible, because we're in a really weird limbo until then. But I hope this video has been helpful for you kind of thinking about what is going to be sort of given a new lease on life until that day. And, I hope you try it out, and may all your rolls be crits.